Clara used to light up every room she walked into. Her laugh was contagious, her dreams big. She'd spend hours sketching ideas for paintings, believing she could build a life full of color and meaning. At 32, she thought she had it all. A partner who promised forever, a future they were planning together. But forever turned out to be a lie. She came home one day to find him gone, his things packed, a note saying he'd been with someone else for months. The betrayal wasn't just losing him, it was losing herself. Everything she'd trusted, her love, her worth, crumbled overnight. Friends tried to reach out, but Clara pushed them away, locking herself in a small apartment where the walls seemed to close in. She stopped painting, stopped dreaming, stopped seeing any point in trying. The world felt like it had turned its back on her, and she didn't know how to fight that kind of hurt. Nights blended into days, each one heavier until she barely recognized the woman staring back in the mirror. One morning, desperate to escape her own thoughts, she went for a walk. No destination in mind, just needing air. Her feet carried her past the edge of town, to a dirt road she'd never noticed before. It led to an old stable, half falling apart, the kind of place people forgot existed. She almost turned back, but a faint sound stopped her. A low, shaky whinny, like a plea. Curious, she stepped closer, peering through the splintered wood. Inside, in a dim corner, stood a horse. It was thin, its coat dull and matted, ribs sharp under sagging skin. The animal's eyes, though tired, locked onto hers with a mix of fear and something else, something alive. It was tethered to a post, surrounded by stale hay, left to fade away like the stable itself. She learned later the horse had been abandoned by its owner, too costly to keep, too broken to sell. No one wanted it. Clara stood there, her own pain raw, and felt a tug she couldn't explain. This horse was as unwanted as she felt, discarded by a world that moved on. She could have walked away. Her life was messy enough and she knew nothing about horses. But those eyes held her. She stepped into the stable, her hands shaking as she reached out. The horse flinched but didn't pull away. She spoke softly, not sure what to say, just wanting it to know she was there. She didn't have a plan, didn't know if she could help, but she decided to come back the next day. She called the horse Star, maybe because its gaze still held a faint spark, like a light fighting through a storm. As she walked home, she felt something shift, small but real, a reason to show up again, even if just for a horse no one else cared about. She had no idea that choice would lead her somewhere new. If Clara's pain and that first connection with Star stirred something in you, if you've ever needed a reason to keep going when trust breaks, hit the like button now. It's a way to stand with everyone finding their way back, just like Clara's starting to. Subscribe to join a community that believes in new beginnings, where stories like this remind us there's always a light to chase. Stay with us to see how Star changes everything. You're not going to want to miss it. Clara woke up the next morning with Star's tired eyes still vivid in her mind. She hadn't planned to go back to that crumbling stable. Her own life was barely holding together, a mess of sleepless nights and unanswered messages from worried friends. But something about that horse, abandoned and unwanted, pulled her in, like a thread she couldn't cut. She grabbed a bag, stuffed it with apples from her nearly empty kitchen, and headed out, telling herself it was just to check if the animal was still there. At the stable, Star stood in the same corner, head low, ribs stark against her dull coat. Clara approached slowly, her steps crunching on the dry straw. She held out an apple, unsure if horses even ate them, and waited. Star sniffed, hesitated, then took a cautious bite. The sound of crunching filled the quiet, and Clara exhaled, a knot in her chest loosening just a fraction. She didn't know the first thing about horses, but she couldn't leave Star like this. She pulled out her phone, searching for basics. How to feed a malnourished horse, what to avoid. The advice was overwhelming. Soaked hay, small meals, fresh water, patience. She found a rusty bucket, rinsed it at a leaking spigot, and filled it with water from a bottle she'd brought. Star drank, slow at first, then eagerly, and Clara watched. Caught by how such a simple act felt like progress, she started coming back every day, bringing what she could afford: carrots, a cheap bag of grain she'd bought with her last few dollars. Each trip forced her to move, to focus on something other than the ache of betrayal that had swallowed her. But it wasn't easy. As she brushed Star's matted coat with an old comb she'd found, her thoughts drifted to herself. She'd been vibrant once, full of ideas, sketching paintings, that poured out her heart. Now she felt as neglected as this horse, left behind by someone who'd promised to stay. The parallel stung. She wondered if she was foolish, thinking she could help Star when she couldn't even help herself. Hadn't she trusted too much before, only to be broken? She pushed the thoughts down, focusing on the horse's slow breaths, the way her ears flicked when Clara spoke. One afternoon, after a week of visits, something shifted. Star lifted her head as Clara approached, not with fear but with recognition. She stepped closer, nudging Clara's hand, her nose warm and rough. Clara froze, her throat tight. It wasn't much, but it was the first time in months she'd felt needed, like her presence mattered to something. She started talking to Star, her voice low, sharing fragments of her pain. How she'd trusted the wrong person, how she'd lost her fire. The horse stood there, listening or not, but it didn't matter. The words spilled out, and for a moment, Clara felt lighter, like she'd set down a weight she'd carried too long. She wasn't ready to trust again, not people, not even herself. The betrayal still burned, a scar that hadn't healed. She doubted she could bring Star back to health, let alone fix her own life. But each small step, filling the bucket, brushing the coat, seeing Star's eyes grow a little brighter, gave her something to hold on to. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was a reason to keep showing up. She'd never cared for an animal before. Never. Had to be this responsible for another life. Yet here she was, learning, trying for a horse no one else wanted. Star wasn't just a distraction anymore. She was a mirror, showing Clara her own fragility, her own faint spark. As she left the stable that day, she glanced back at the horse standing a bit taller. She didn't know where this was going, but she'd be back tomorrow. Clara had been showing up for Star every day, and it was starting to feel like a rhythm, not just a task. The horse wasn't as frail anymore. Her coat had a faint sheen, her steps less wobbly. Clara watched her closely, noticing how Star would paw at the ground, testing her strength, even when her body hadn't fully caught up. One morning she saw Star try to trot in the small pen outside the stable. The horse stumbled, her legs shaky, but she didn't stop. She shook her head, snorted and tried again, moving a little farther before resting. Clara stood by the fence, her breath catching. That stubbornness, that refusal to stay down, hit her hard. She'd been stuck herself, hiding from the world since the betrayal that tore her apart. Her ex's lies, the way he'd walked out, had left her feeling like she'd never be whole again. But Star wasn't giving up, so why was she? That thought lingered, heavy but stirring. She started thinking about her old sketchbooks, the ones she'd shoved under her bed after everything fell apart. Painting used to be her way of making sense of the world, turning chaos into something beautiful. She hadn't touched a brush in months, convinced her creativity was as dead as her trust. But watching Star, she felt an itch, a pull to try again. Later that day, she dragged a chair to the stable and sat near Star, who was munching grain from a bucket. She pulled out a notepad, nothing fancy, and started sketching. At first, her lines were stiff, uncertain, a rough outline of Star's head, her ears flicked back. But as she kept going, the strokes loosened. She drew Star mid-step, capturing the fire in her eyes, the way she fought to move. Each sketch felt like a small release, like she was letting out pieces of the pain she'd held so tight. She filled pages, losing track of time, her hands smudged with pencil. It wasn't about making art for anyone else. It was about feeling alive again, even just a little. Star seemed to sense it, standing closer, her breath warm as she nudged the notepad once. Clara laughed, a sound that surprised her, and kept drawing. But not everyone. saw the point. One afternoon, the stable's owner stopped by, an older guy who'd let her tend to Star out of pity more than anything. He glanced at her sketches, scattered on a crate, and shook his head. Said she was wasting her time, that a half-dead horse like Star wasn't worth the effort, and neither was she if she thought doodling would fix her life. He'd seen her type before, he said, people who think they can save something broken when they're just as lost. His words cut deep, slicing open the doubts she'd been trying to bury. She wanted to snap back to say he was wrong, but part of her believed him. What was she doing, pouring herself into a horse and some sketches? She'd trusted someone once, built a life with them, and it had all been a lie. Maybe she was just setting herself up to fall again. After he left, she sat by Star, the notepad untouched in her lap. The horse grazed nearby, oblivious, her movements steadier than they'd been weeks ago. Clara watched her, the way she kept pushing forward no matter how hard it was. Star didn't care about the stable owner's words or the odds against her. She just kept going. Clara traced a finger over her latest sketch, Star's silhouette against a rough horizon. The betrayal still ached, the fear of failing still loomed, but something about this horse made her want to try, even if she didn't fully believe she could. She wasn't sure what she was building. Hope, maybe, or just a way to survive. But for now, she'd keep sketching. Keep showing up, letting Star's spirit nudge her towards something she couldn't yet name. Clara couldn't shake the stable owner's words, the ones that called her efforts a waste, her sketches a pointless distraction. They echoed her own fears, the ones that whispered she'd never rebuild what betrayal had stolen. Her notepad was full of Star's images, her steady gaze, her stubborn steps forward, but now it sat untouched, the pencil still. She kept going to the stable, feeding and brushing Star, but doubt had crept in heavier each day. Was she fooling herself, thinking she could save a horse or salvage her own broken pieces? Star moved better now, her frame less gaunt, but Clara felt stuck, trapped between wanting to try and fearing another fall. Then her phone pinged with a message that jolted her. A local art shop owner, someone she'd met years ago at a market, had heard she was sketching again. They were hosting a small exhibit, a chance for locals to show their work, and offered her a spot. Just a few pieces, no pressure, they said. The idea sparked something, pride maybe, but it was quickly drowned by panic. Her last paintings, the ones from before everything shattered, had been ignored, tucked away in a closet after her ex called them childish. What if she put her heart out there again and it was crushed? She typed a polite no, ready to hit send, but paused, glancing at Star, who was nosing at the stable floor. The horse had been exploring more, her strength growing, and that day, she was pawing at a loose board in the corner. Clara watched, curious as Star nudged harder, revealing a dusty bundle wedged beneath. She knelt down, brushing away dirt, and found an old journal, its pages yellowed but intact. The handwriting inside told stories of the stable's past, entries from an artist who'd once owned Star. The woman had written about the horse's spirit, how it inspired her boldest works, canvases that had won hearts before she'd passed on. Clara's pulse quickened. She flipped through, finding sketches tucked between pages, horses, fields, moments alive with motion, not unlike her own. It was as if Star had led her to this, a whisper from someone who'd known the same fire. Driven by the discovery, she dug deeper into Star's history. A faded tag on the horse's old halter led to records online, mentioning a lineage tied to a champion racer, a bloodline known for grit and grace. Star wasn't just a cast-off, she carried a legacy, one that had outlasted neglect. The realization hit like a spark. Clara's sketches weren't just doodles, they were part of something bigger, a story of coming back, just like Star's. She spent the next night poring over her work, picking the best drawings, ones that captured the horse's fight, her own fight. She added new ones, bolder, blending Star's strength with her own pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, the faint hope creeping in. The pages felt like a mirror, showing not just a horse but a woman, remembering who she could be. When she finished, the exhibit invite stared back from her phone, Fear hadn't gone away. It was still there, sharp and loud. But Star's steady presence, the journal's words, the truth of her heritage, they all pushed against it. Clara thought of the artist who'd loved this horse, who'd turned struggle into beauty. She could try that too. She deleted her refusal and typed a new reply, saying she'd be there. It wasn't about proving anything to the world, not anymore. It was about honoring what Star had shown her, that even the discarded can shine again. She looked at the horse, now standing taller, her eyes bright in the dim stable light. Clara didn't know if anyone would care about her art, but for the first time she believed it was worth sharing. She'd take the risk, not just for herself, but for the horse that had carried her this far. Clara stood in the small art shop, her sketches and paintings lining the walls, each one a piece of her journey with Star. The horse's spirit filled every stroke, her first hesitant steps, her bold trots, her eyes that seemed to see right through to the truth. The exhibit was simple, just a local event, but to Clara, it felt like baring her soul. She'd spent years hiding, letting betrayal silence her, and now here she was, letting strangers see her heart. She braced for judgment, for whispers that her work wasn't enough, that she wasn't enough. Instead, people gathered, their faces soft as they studied her art. A woman lingered by a sketch of Star galloping, saying it reminded her of her own fight to start over. Another asked how Clara had captured so much life in a horse everyone else had given up on. The shop owner called her to the front, handing her a mic. Her hands shook. She hadn't planned to speak, but she took a breath and started. She talked about finding Star in that rundown stable, how the horse's resilience pulled her out of her own darkness. Her voice wavered, but it grew stronger as she described the betrayal that had broken her, the sketches that helped her heal, and the journal that showed her she wasn't alone. The crowd listened, still, then clapped, a warm sound that wrapped around her like a hug. She stepped back, her chest lighter, feeling something she hadn't in years: pride. In the weeks that followed, her art took on a life of its own. Photos from the exhibit spread online, shared by people who said the work spoke to their own struggles, their own hopes. A local gallery reached out, then another, offering shows, commissions, chances she'd never imagined. Messages poured in from strangers and old friends alike, calling her an inspiration, saying her story gave them courage. Clara, who'd once thought she'd never trust or create again, was now a name people knew, a voice that mattered. She didn't chase the spotlight. It found her, built on the truth she'd poured into her work. One evening, she walked to the stable, now less dilapidated thanks to a few neighbors, who'd pitched in after hearing about Star. The horse was transformed, her coat glossy, her muscles firm, her movements full of fire. Clara had worked with a vet who'd donated time, amazed by their story, and Star's health had soared. She led her to a nearby field, the grass soft underfoot, and unclipped the lead. Star hesitated, then took off, galloping in wide circles, her mane catching the fading light. Clara watched, a smile breaking through, her eyes stinging. This horse, once left to waste away, was now a force unstoppable. She sat in the grass, Star grazing nearby, and thought about how far they'd come. The betrayal that had shattered her felt distant now, not gone but no longer in control. She'd found her way back to painting, to herself, not because the pain vanished, but because she'd learned to carry it differently. Star had shown her that, how to keep moving, how to trust in small steps, how to believe in something again. She pulled out a sketchbook, flipping through pages of Star, of fields, of moments she'd captured since that first day in the stable. The success wasn't just the galleries or the praise. It was this, sitting here, whole again, seeing beauty in the world she'd thought had turned its back. Star wandered over, nudging her shoulder, and Clara laughed, scratching the horse's neck. She whispered a thank you, not just for the art or the comeback, but for the life she'd found. The scars were still there, but so was the strength, the kind she hadn't known she had until a horse nobody wanted showed her it was there all along. Clara looked out at the horizon, Star's steady breaths beside her, and knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, one she'd paint with every color she could find. Clara and Star's story shows us that even after the deepest wounds, there's a way forward, a chance to shine again. If their journey from betrayal to a new beginning touched you, hit the like button. It's a shout out to everyone rediscovering their strength, just like Clara did. Subscribe to join a community that cherishes these stories, where we lift up hope and resilience together. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Let's spread this spark far and wide. What animal has ever given you a new perspective? Share in the comments.